I hope you all brought rotten vegetables to hurl at me. All right, so my childhood was basically one long episode of Home Improvement. My dad, who wasn't actually Tim Allen, but could have been, was incredibly creative. He was an actor, he was a singer, he was a musician, he was a poet, he was a painter. Like, he could do everything. And he was very handy. And he loved woodworking, and he loved building stuff. And if you remember, in Home Improvement, Tim Allen, was always remodeling the house or was building something, but then would generally get horribly injured in some crazy way, but he always survived, and that was my dad. My dad was always building something, and he always got injured, and it was always up to me to take care of him. Like, he'd be in the garage, working on a project, that he called them, and it wasn't uncommon to hear, "Ah, shit! Oh, fuck!" like echoing from the garage, and I'd be in the living room watching TV, and every time I'd hear a clang or a bang or a shit or a fuck, I'd look to the door, expecting my father to come bursting in, dragging his leg or holding his arm, like some scene out of Saving Private Ryan, and like once he burst through the door. He came bursting through the door, and he had this piece of wood stuck on his hand, and he was like, "Ah, shit, Jake!" And apparently he had shot a nail through his hand into the piece of wood, so he put it on the ground, and I had to step on it and get a pair of pliers and pull the nail out. Now, a normal person would probably go to the doctor or go to the hospital, to see if they hit a bone or anything vital, or at the very least, maybe go to the bathroom to wash it off and put a Band-Aid on. And my dad, no sooner had a nail out, my dad was already going out the door, right back to the garage. And that was just my dad. I have never seen a human being fall off of as many ladders and scaffoldings and survive as my father. I shit you not, I saw him fall off a 25-foot scaffolding onto concrete and hit like a sack of potatoes, and I didn't know what to do. I was terrified that I had just witnessed the death of my father, and I'm standing there staring at him, and all I hear is, "Ah, shit!" I'm like, he's okay, and when I wasn't taking care of my dad and sewing him back together, I was playing with G.I. Joes. And G.I. Joes were by far my favorite toy of all time. I had the G.I. Joe market cornered. I was down at the store every day, and I'd ask the lady, "What new toys, G.I. Joes do you have in?" If they didn't have any new ones, I'd ask her when they were expecting the new ones in. I loved G.I. Joe so much, and I don't know what it was that I found so fascinating about them. It was I guess it was that they were this paramilitary group that functioned on their own orders, and they didn't listen to anyone, and they didn't answer to anyone, but they always did the right thing, but they were indestructible. So you could smash them with a hammer and throw them in the water and just throw them down a fucking mountain and run back down there and pick them up, and it was they just looked at you in the eye and were like, "What else have you got for me?" And I was just obsessed. And I got that trait from my dad, because when my dad was obsessed with something, he was relentless. He wouldn't give up. He was hanging siding on our house one time, and he fell off a 6-foot ladder. Not a big ladder, but a 6-foot ladder onto these cement steps right in front of our house. Right in front of the door, and I'm in the living room, and I heard, "Ah, shit!" And I come running out, and he landed on his elbow, and he gets up, and he had sliced his elbow down, and you could see his bone, and there was blood all over the ground, and I'm like, "Jesus Christ, Dad!" I'm "We need to go to the hospital." A suggestion that I had made so many times in the past, and could literally see the words going in one ear and going out his other. And no sooner had I finished that he had his arm on his chest, and he was duct taping his arm to his chest, and then started climbing back up the ladder. And I'm standing there, and I'm like, "Well, what are you doing?" And like an old Western film, he turns to the clouds, these dark clouds in the distance, and he goes, "Look at the clouds, Jake! "It's gonna rain!" And he continues to put up the siding. Now, when you're putting up siding, they're heavy pieces that you have to hold with one hand and hammer with the other. So, to do this with one hand, I literally witnessed my father leaning against the siding with his shoulder and hammering with this hand. It was incredible. So given that, when he disappeared into the garage to work on a project shortly before Christmas, I was more than a little worried. I was worried that I would sit in my room and I would discuss, with my G.I. Joes, like, what's the probability that Dad gets horribly maimed? And how would that affect Christmas? Like the overall mood or the presents I was getting. And, maybe the present that I got, which was a pair of loafers, wasn't the best present that year. If he got injured, maybe he'd need a set of crutches or a wheelchair, or some duct tape or a lifetime pass to an ambulance. And me and my G.I. Joes would sit in the room and we'd go spy on him and try to see what he was doing. But he was very good about keeping the door closed and all the windows closed. And he somehow always knew when I was lurking. I'd be in my room with my G.I. Joes, waiting for the shit, the fuck, to come, but it never came. So, Christmas, I have all my presents open, and I'm looking over my presents, and I've got a bunch of great stuff, and I'm looking around, and I notice there's a few no-shows, there were no G.I. Joes, which for me was like a shoo-in with Santa. Like Santa, if there was one thing I loved, it was G.I. Joes. So I'm like, well, maybe I missed a present, and I'm looking around, and I can't see it. And I think my dad could sense my growing frustration, and he did the classic Christmas morning, like, "Hey, Jake, I think Santa brought you one more." And I look to where he's pointing, and in the corner is this giant mound. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay. And one thing goes through my mind, I'm looking at him like, why would Santa choose to wrap this in my Ninja Turtle bed sheets? That's what I'm looking at. But I forget that, and I go over to it, and my dad does the unveiling, the Siegfried and Roy unveiling, and I'm staring at this giant gray plaster mound on a piece of plywood, and I'm standing there looking at it, and he's like, looking at me, waiting for it to process, and I have no fucking clue what it is. And I'm standing there and I'm confused, and I'm like, well, what is it? And he's like, well, what is it? It's a base for your G.I. Joes. And I look at him, and I look back to this mound, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I can see he's like, come over here. And then it was incredible. He led me through the base. He opened up this huge hatch in the front of the mountain, and he's like, look, this is where your tanks and your jeeps can drive through. And I looked in, and I saw that it was hollow, and he turned the whole piece of plywood around, and he opened up the back, and the back was on these hinges, and the whole back of the mountain opened up, and he had built this intricate, NORAD military secret base with all these different levels and all these little trapdoors and hatches that my G.I. Joes could pop out of and shoot the enemy, and a crane on the top that you could take stuff out of the Jeep. And it had holes that my G.I. Joes could slide down, and had little ropes they could swing on, and had ladders everywhere, which I always thought was funny because why would he include the one thing that's been trying to kill him his entire life? I don't know. But he also had all the G.I. Joes that I was expecting. They were all set up in there, doing their thing. And it was the best present I have ever received. I've never played with a toy more in my entire life than with that. And 3.5 years later, we were at the beach, and I had all my G.I. Joes with me, and I had built this little sand base for all my G.I. Joes, blah, blah. And then the water came up, and the white water washed away 95% of my G.I. Joes. I literally stood on the beach, screaming as my life was washing away. It was my 12-year-old life. And I stood there, shaking. I had no idea what to do. And I just couldn't process how that could happen. And then it hit me, you're 12, you're turning 13 very soon. maybe your G.I. Joes have left you because you need to make the transition into your teens, on your own, which was, I think, a big realization for a 12-year-old. So I'm still bummed out, but I'm like, all right, guess I got to do this on my own. And I'm walking over back to my dad and with the family, and I'm walking over and I stop, and my dad, he's standing there like this, hands on his hips and big barrel chest, and he's just kind of looking over the ocean, like Poseidon looking over his realm. And he's like, oh yeah, looking over it. And I stop and I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm looking at this man who's this indestructible, get knocked down, get right back up human, has those characteristics. And I stop and I go, oh my God. My father is the real life G.I. Joe.